The cosmos was never short of brawls, blood and Bastiches looking for trouble. But when it came to sheer mindless destruction, few could compare to Cain Marko, the Juggernaut, and Lobo, the main man. One was an avatar of mystical force, an unstoppable juggernaut in the literal sense. The other, an immortal Czarnian bounty hunter, feared across the galaxy for his brutality, regeneration, and sheer lack of morals. Their paths were never meant to cross until the Universal Church of Truth made an offer Lobo couldn't refuse. It started with a bounty, a big one. The kind that made even a hard-drinking, bloodthirsty lunatic like Lobo pause. The Universal Church had one major problem. Juggernaut was wrecking their stronghold on a distant planet, smashing their armies like tin cans, and making a mockery of their so-called divine authority. The reason? Simple. Cain Marko hated zealots. He had been hired by a rival galactic syndicate to ensure the Universal Church never got a foothold in this sector. And what better way to do that than to pummel every single one of their soldiers into cosmic dust? But the Universal Church wasn't going to take that lying down. You want this guy gone? Lobo sneered, his cigar burning as he leaned back in his chair, feet kicked up on a table inside his ship. Let me guess, you tried hitting him with an army, and he turned your boys into pavement stains? The priest leader of the church looked unnerved. He is an unstoppable force. Our weapons do nothing. Our faith does nothing. We need something. Yeah, I get it. Something meaner. Something nastier. Something that don't stay down. Lobo grinned, showing his sharpened cigar-stained teeth. Lucky for you, I'm that something. They told him Juggernaut was mystical, unstoppable, a force of nature. Lobo didn't care. As long as the money was good, he'd fight God himself. So he set course for the war-ravaged moon of Kraglon 5, where Juggernaut was busy tearing through hover tanks, mechs, and entire battle platoons like they were made of cheap cardboard. Kraglon 5 was already half destroyed when Lobo arrived. The ground was a graveyard of wrecked war machines, and the sky was dark with smoke and fire. In the middle of the carnage stood Juggernaut, his massive form towering over the battlefield. His crimson armor was dented but unbroken, his boots crushing the remains of an armored tank beneath them. He was a walking force of devastation, his fists coated in the remains of another wave of zealot warriors who thought they could stop him. Lobo stepped off his bike, hook and chain wrapped around his arm. He flicked his cigar aside and exhaled a cloud of smoke, cracking his neck. Ain't every day I get to tangle with someone they call unstoppable, Lobo muttered. Hope you're tougher than the last poor Bastich they put a bounty on. Juggernaut turned, his red eyes gleaming beneath his helmet. He didn't know who this scruffy-looking biker was, but he sure as hell didn't like the attitude. You got one chance to walk away. Pow! Juggernaut rumbled, his voice like a rock slide. Otherwise, you're just another piece of debris. Lobo grinned. Yeah? Well, buddy, I got two rules. 1, I don't walk away from a fight. 2, I ain't just debris, I'm the Bastich, who's gonna wreck your ugly mug. Juggernaut cracked his knuckles. You don't know what you're messing with. Lobo spun his chain, letting it rattle against the rocky ground. Oh, I know exactly what I'm messing with. The question is, are you ready for the main man? The air between them tensed, charged with the promise of imminent destruction. One was the avatar of an unstoppable force. The other was an immortal, unkillable bastard with no concept of restraint. The battle was about to begin, and Kraglon 5 would never be the same again.
Are you just watching?
Subscribe, please.
The moment was electric. Two titans, two living disasters, stood face to face on the smoldering battlefield of Kraglon 5. The sky churned with storm clouds. The ground cracked under their weight, and the universe itself seemed to hold its breath. Then, boom! Lobo moved first. With a flick of his wrist, he hurled his chain, the razor-edged hook spinning through the air toward Juggernaut's helmet. Clang! The chain wrapped around Juggernaut's head, and Lobo yanked hard. Juggernaut barely budged. Lobo grinned. Not bad. But let's see how you handle this. With a titanic pull, Lobo launched himself forward, using the chain to propel himself toward Juggernaut like a missile. He crashed into him at full speed, fist cocked back, aiming for Juggernaut's jaw. Wham! The impact shook the battlefield, sending shockwaves rippling through the shattered ruins. Juggernaut didn't even flinch. Instead, he reached out, grabbed Lobo by the face, and slammed him into the ground with a force that cracked the planet's crust. Boom! Lobo groaned, his head buried halfway into the rocky terrain. He spat out a tooth, then grinned. That all you got? With a vicious spin, Lobo wrapped his legs around Juggernaut's arm and used the momentum to flip the massive brute over, sending him crashing through a burning temple. Ancient pillars shattered like glass as Juggernaut rolled to a stop. Lobo cracked his knuckles and walked toward the wreckage, rolling his shoulders. You're tougher than you look, I'll give you that. The dust settled, and from the rubble, Juggernaut rose unscathed. You talk too much, Juggernaut grunted. Then he charged. It was like a freight train colliding with reality itself. Lobo barely had time to react before Juggernaut plowed into him, hitting him with the force of a supernova. The ground beneath them shattered as Lobo was blasted across the battlefield, his body carving a trench a mile long through rock and steel. He smashed through a mountain, reducing it to rubble, before finally skidding to a stop. For a moment, he just lay there, smoking, broken bones snapping back into place. Then, okay, you big red Bastich. Now I'm pissed. Lobo vaulted back onto his feet, summoning his bikes with a whistle. Two massive, customized space hogs came roaring from the sky. Lobo jumped onto one, grabbed the other by the handlebars, and swung it like a club. Juggernaut was already charging again, unstoppable, relentless. Lobo met him halfway. Crash! The bike exploded against Juggernaut's head, but it did nothing to slow him down. Lobo drove a fist into Juggernaut's chest, following up with a chain-wrapped uppercut. The blows were like nuclear detonations, but Juggernaut just kept coming. You don't get it, Juggernaut rumbled. You can't stop me. He grabbed Lobo's wrist mid-swing, twisted it, and drove a knee into his gut. Lobo spat blood, but headbutted Juggernaut right back. The shockwave from the impact leveled an entire city block. Both warriors stumbled back. Then suddenly, Lobo laughed. You know what, big guy? I think I like you. He wiped blood from his mouth, his grin widening. But I got a job to do. Lobo reached into his belt and pulled out a grenade the size of a cannonball. Magic-based anti-armor, made for knocking Bastiches like you into orbit. He shoved it into Juggernaut's helmet and detonated it point blank. Bam! The explosion was blinding, shaking the planet's surface. For a moment there was silence. Then from the fireball, Juggernaut emerged, still standing. His armor was scorched, his helmet cracked, but he was still moving. Lobo whistled. Hells, that should have at least knocked you dizzy. Juggernaut growled. You don't get it, do you? Lobo did now. He had fought gods, demons, and cosmic horrors. But Juggernaut wasn't just strong. He wasn't just tough. He was unstoppable. And Lobo? He was unkillable, but not immovable. Juggernaut grabbed him by the throat and drove him into the core of Kraglan 5. The entire moon cracked in half. Lobo crawled from the wreckage, groaning. His regeneration worked over time, but even he was starting to feel it. Juggernaut stomped toward him, unfazed as always. Lobo sighed, pulling out a communicator. All right. I'll say it, this one's a bust. The Universal Church's priest came through the receiver. So, you completed the mission? Lobo winced, looking at the Juggernaut still marching toward him. Yeah, about that. He blasted off into space, leaving the ruined battlefield behind. Cain Marko watched him go, arms crossed. He had won, again. He didn't need a bounty to tell him that some fights weren't worth chasing. Juggernaut's unstoppable nature ultimately gave him the edge. Lobo might be immortal, but he isn't immune to being outmatched. Once he realized Juggernaut wasn't going down, he did what he rarely does, bailed.